Number 5. St. Mary the Virgin Church. Clop Hill, England. I gotta say, that sounds like it's a fake place, like where Sir Topham Hatt lives. Well, not only is it real, but it's home to a bone-chilling haunted church, St. Mary the Virgin Church. Now, St. Mary was built in 1350 outside the main settlement of totally real place Clop Hill. Traditionally, churches are built facing the east. I didn't know that. It's so it can align with the sun rising, which in Christianity is associated with heaven and the Messiah. Churches have their altars facing east, so you pray in that holy direction. Well, St. Mary's just had to be a little different, and this church is facing the west, facing away from God. And it's why some people believe the church is hosted to evil spirits, as facing west means they've shunned God and opened their doors to the devil. Paranormal investigators have strongly suspected the church as being host to satanic rituals. As the church fell into disuse, it became a popular spot for vandals, and if you believe the legends, black magic. In 1963, a local couple saw two people wandering around holding a human skull, which definitely I think would cause you to look twice. The people told the couple that they had found the skull in St. Mary's, where it had been jammed into a wall. When the couple went to investigate, they found on the floor a breastbone, pelvis, and leg bones, all laid out in a pattern used for black mass. Pretty spooky. Scattered cockerel feathers and tracings of two crosses filled in red were found inside the church as well. And as if that wasn't slightly unnerving enough, they also found that 6 graves of women in particular had been tampered with as well. All signs seem to be pointing towards some dark rituals happening at St. Mary's Church. Common sightings at the St. Mary's Church range from smaller scale things like strange screeching during the night or hearing the bell going off despite being long abandoned, and the more threatening reports seeing tall, dark figures wandering the ruins of the church, perhaps getting themselves ready for another ritual, or perhaps they've been contacted by a ritual and are arriving. Only thing I know is I won't be checking out the midnight mass there anytime soon. And if you're interested in way more scary stories of all manners, cryptids, conspiracies, churches, hauntings, aliens, we've got a little bit of everything at Top 5 Scary. So click on through, find something to get cozy with, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell so you catch all of our videos as they drop. But do all that stuff at the end of this one, okay? Because we got way more haunted churches for you coming right up. Number 4. Our next entry on the list today is going to be the Quia Episcopal Church. And if you haven't said that, try saying that 10 times fast. I dare you. Located in picturesque Stafford, Virginia. The church has 200 years of history to it, which means it's also got approximately 200 years worth of ghost stories to study. When the church was first built way back when in the 18th century, it was stained by an unfortunate tragedy. You see, the surrounding areas were exhausted by war and the lack of resources, food, and money, and as such, brigands would take to the dark country roads to attack innocents during the night for whatever they had on them. Well, one young woman was hiding from a gang of highwaymen and marauders and sought out the church as a safe haven. Unfortunately, the bandits eventually caught up with her and she met an untimely end. Now, these men were never caught for their crime, and her body was not found for hundreds of years, left there to rot and decompose. And many believe that because of this, her spirit is tied to the church. And there have been several reports of hauntings ever since the discovery of those accursed bones. Visitors mention hearing footsteps frantically scattered around at night. These footsteps break into a run, but if you go searching, you'll never be able to find anyone attached to them. Voices can be heard in the room where she was attacked, some saying it sounds like a call for help or a painful scream of a struggle. Some go so far as to say they saw a transparent apparition of the woman in the church's windows or on the balcony. One story comes to us from a custodian who worked the graveyard shift there in the 1990s, claiming that he saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the graces, and says that he saw her smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished. One last one on this church. In the 1990s, to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary, the church sent out an invitation to a group of Civil War reenactors to fight a mock battle on its ground. During the night, one of the reenactors was complaining that there was a red and orange light that was flickering the entire night during the church that prevented him from sleeping. The man explained this to the father of the church, and the father explained back that there was no electricity in the vestry, and that the light must have been the spirit confused by why the Civil War had started up again. Imagine, you're a ghost, you're already out of time, and then you look outside and you see guys from your time? My little ghostly sense of the world would be so thrown off. I would have to buy a new ghost calendar. Number 3. Monaster Nagayal Duff, or Abbey of the Black Hag if you don't got all that time. Wow, you see that? You see what that church is called in that little chyron below me right now? I'm just supposed to pronounce that with my lips? Okay, it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag, and that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. Black Abbey of the Hag, only name this church has ever gone by, and it was built in 1298. And it was one of the well-known medieval convents in Old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making it already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more supernatural and overgrown and spooky. I mean, the place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag. You don't name a place that unless it's extremely haunted or if there's like a cool boss fight or something there. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. It's believed that the last abbess, horrible word by the way, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way, okay? She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey, not being down for witches at all. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because it sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furled, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being renamed the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe it, there's actually more to this one. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband. But it wouldn't be the end of the Countess, because sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, meaning someone eventually went to dig up that grave, finding worn out finger bones, meaning she was still alive when she was buried. It's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey. Number 2. The Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is an old London estate that has the unique distinction of being considered the most haunted building in the United Kingdom. No big deal, or anything. Almost immediately after its construction, stories of hauntings started to creep out. One of the first local legends says that in the 12th century, a priest and a nun had a naughty little affair, and when they were discovered, the nun was bricked up and left to rot in the nearby church. Since then, they say that her spirit roams the rectory. In 1900, 4 daughters of the then estate owner all said that they saw a nun wandering around the estate late at night. They tried to talk to her but got no response back, just a scary ghost stare. The family claimed they'd see this nun around the property, and on one occasion they thought they saw the spectral apparition of a horse-drawn carriage with a headless rider, some real Sleepy Hollow stuff. From there on, there was all these reports of bizarre sounds or strange shadows creeping out the corner of your eye. In 1927, the estate changed hands as the original family owning the estate had all passed on, and a new family, the Smiths, had moved in. Shortly after, they discovered a human skull in the cupboard in a brown bag, which is not a great housewarming gift, to be honest. They reported poltergeist behavior, unexplained footsteps, lights flicking around them, and the same sightings of headless specters. Now, they only lasted 2 years, not being down for any of the hauntings or skulls in cupboards, any of that business. And the next family, the Foysters, didn't have much better luck. They had objects flying around their home, and on one occasion claimed their daughter was attacked by something truly horrible. They moved out as well. And the last owner of the rectory would be Captain Gregson, who accidentally lit the estate ablaze while unpacking, although insurance claims they think the fire was started intentionally, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cast away whatever evil has been trapped in the Borley Rectory for so long, or perhaps he unintentionally unleashed it out into the world. Time will tell. At number 1, Mortimer Abbey. Mortimer Abbey is a monastery in the forest of Lyons, France. A real old church built in 1134 on marshland, near the stagnant water of the drainage lake. The monks dug it out to try and dry the marshy land around the Fulbrock stream, which was called the Dead Pond. In French, Mortimer, which is where the name comes from. You can kind of hear it there. Mortimer, you know. Perhaps it's this history of being built on a dead pond is why Mortimer Abbey was doomed to be haunted. Now, the abbey flourished for centuries, but over time started to become claimed by the passage of time, and it fell into decline and disrepair. In the 17th century, there was an attempt to try and rebuild the abbey and recapture its former old glory, but the decline was already pretty present and had set in by that point, and by the time of the French Revolution, only 5 monks still remained in the abbey. Eventually, the abbey would collapse entirely and go private, and in 1863, the abbey would find itself in the hands of a rich Parisian family, the Delarues. Mr. Delarue moved his wife and his sons into the abbey, but soon discovered they weren't weren't the only tenants. While walking the lawns, the young people of the house saw a light from the library. As if by an invisible hand, these hatches unfastened, their handles turned, and the windows and doors all opened. The paintings on the inside of the abbey turned themselves around and steps thundered out into the halls, and nobody moved out immediately after. I would have started looking for new real estate right then and there. But one night the young Delarue, Charles, had his fiancée over to come see the estate that would become her new home in marriage. She was offered the guest room, but found herself terrified during the night when she couldn't sleep because she was too busy being tormented by mysterious sounds and objects around the room that were hurling themselves around, being possessed by something. Having had, quite frankly, enough, like I think any of us might have, the young suitor announced she would never live in this house, called off the entire marriage, and hurried back to Paris tout de suite, where there were plenty of handsome young men asking her hand in marriage who didn't live in old haunted estates, okay? That's the message to take away from this. Get the love you deserve, and the love you deserve is not in a haunted house.
Okay, I think I'm going to start off today with the Emanuel Baptist Church in San Francisco. Now this place was cursed from the start. In 1878, the church moved from a rented hall on 22nd and Folsom to more permanent digs at 22nd and Cat. Now a short time later, the church's first pastor, Reverend Charles Hughes, slashed his own throat with a straight razor. His replacement chose a more common method of ending it all and fired an explosive into his own head. 2 ministers, 2 lives ended early. You'd think that mission residents would have burned the place to the ground after that and called it a day, but the church just kept trucking. The congregation moved to a new building on Bartlett Street between 22nd and 23rd in 1890, and things stayed quiet for nearly 5 years. When the Reverend John George Gibson took over the church in 1984, his predecessor had 0 issues. But the curse came back, and this time it was gorier than ever. On Saturday, April 13th of 1895, a group of church ladies was decorating the pulpit for the next day's lavish Easter Sunday celebrations, when one of them found the red fluid-drenched body of a young woman in a small library storeroom. The girl had been harmed physically, and her remains had been cut and hacked, according to the Spokesman Review of Spokane, Washington. The victim had also been gagged by the assailant with a part of her underclothing that was jammed down her throat with a sharp stick. At first, the churchwoman thought the body was 21-year-old Blanche Lamont, a popular member of the congregation who had been missing for 10 days. However, the body was later identified as Minnie Williams, a woman who liked the church enough to journey from Alameda by ferry for services. Lamont only stayed missing for another day though, before a search of the church grounds uncovered her body at the top of a rickety staircase in the church's ominous bell tower. She was stripped of her clothing with her hands clasped upon her chest, according to sources. Unlike Williams, Lamont was not mutilated beyond the marks of fingers that had been pressed deep into the tender flesh and the damage done by 11 days of decomposition. The cursed church could now add a double homicide to its litany of misfortunes. Police quickly arrested Theodora Durant, a medical student and superintendent of Emanuel Baptist Sunday School, who was identified by several eyewitnesses as the last man seen with both victims. He denied killing the 2 women, but Williams's purse was found in Durant's coat during a search of his house. A pawnbroker later testified that Durant had tried to sell him one of Lamont's rings days after her disappearance. The jury found him guilty in just 22 minutes on November 1st of 1895. After the killings, Mission residents called for the cursed church to be burned to the ground, but it stayed. Even the earthquake of 1906 and the fires that followed failed to take down the building. At this point, I've lost track of how many people died at or because of this church, and as somebody who was already uneasy around religious buildings, hell to the no. The amount of bad energy is just oozing from this place. Sorry folks, it doesn't get any better with the Egg Hill Church. Now supposedly this is one of the most haunted churches that we know of. Legend has it that the crazy pastor of the Egg Hill Church killed all his parishioners post-communion, and soon after went the way of the rope necklace. Local legend says that in the late 19th century, the church's minister decided to kill his entire congregation during a Halloween service. While the congregation's younger generation played in the rooms below the main church, the minister passed around poisoned bread and wine. While the second congregation choked on their last words, their offspring rushed upstairs to see the final moments of their parents. At the crescendo of the atrocity, the debauched minister went the way of the rope necklace near the altar. Some believe that his ghost haunts the abandoned church, while others believe that the ghosts of his victims haunt it. People have reported hearing the cries of the young victims that died at the hands of the pastor, even though the building remains locked away and empty. And hey, if that wasn't enough, word has it that the abandoned church and its premises are vandalized, along with being haunted by ghosties. Not that I think it'll do any good, but this is a warning to urban explorers and wannabes, maybe just avoid this one. Our next church might be a little obvious, but St. Michael's over in Chernobyl shouldn't really be on anybody's must-see list. It's about 5 miles from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant complex and 3 miles from the border of Belarus. It's in the abandoned vision of Krasny. It is located on the left bank of the Pripyat River and was previously part of the Red Chernobyl area, near the center of the village of Krasny, so this is the Russian Orthodox Church, St. Michael's. It was built in 1800. It's encompassed by iron gates decorated with a cross and diamond motifs, and it's about 215 years old. And shockingly, apparently it's not as dilapidated as one might imagine. The peeling, thick, white painted exterior, the 8-foot-tall mustard-toned oak doors, the blue and green paint, hand-carved details and embellishments, and it's also topped off with not one, but 2 beautiful copper classic onion turrets. And this all rises in the most beautiful, regal, colorful contrast amidst what is now a forest. Officially, St. Michael's has not been used in decades, but it's still, I guess, in good condition. After viewing so many buildings that have become ruins, one can only look at this fascinating structure and imagine its future. The pews have all been removed, and several of the decorative wall coverings have shed, and paintings have disappeared. In the nave, a menumalia, or candle stand, and iconostasis, icon stand, are still poised and at the center of attention. Accompanying these staples of a traditional Russian Orthodox church, there is a small table where people come to leave offerings. Now, unless you want to burn whatever you're wearing after your visit, this isn't the church you want to spend time at. Now, this next church has a name that's kind of deceiving: the Chapel of Ease. If one were to travel along Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard on St. Helena Island, shortly before you reach the Hanging Tree, off to the left you will find the ruins of an old church, what is known in the area as the Chapel of Ease. This chapel was built to serve the population of the area, since where everything was at the time, it was too far away from the Parish Church in Beaufort to attend Sunday services. Building of the chapel commenced in about 1740 using tabby construction materials. The St. Helena Chapel of Ease was ideally situated for the planters of the island. By 1812, it had been granted the designation of Parish Church. Then on November 4th of 1861, Sunday services were interrupted by a messenger who brought news of the impending invasion of nearby Beaufort by Union troops to a Captain William Oliver Perry Fripp. Fripp's ancestors had been designated to maintain the building and upkeep the chapel, as John Fripp III had left 500 pounds for the purpose in 1780. A year earlier, Edgar Fripp and his wife Eliza had taken their place in a mausoleum built for them in the adjacent graveyard back in 1852. Built by Charleston stonecutter W.T. White, it remains on the property today and seems to still be in good condition. According to a diary written by Thomas B. Chaplin on April 13th of 1852, said vault was a fine affair and did not have to wait very long for its occupants. The Yankees broke it open during the war, hoping for treasure, so it's somewhat out of order, but to this day it still looks cute. The chapel was destroyed in a horrendous fire that happened after the Civil War. Now today, the ruins in the graveyard remain. The vault still remains out of order though. The planters left St. Helena with the arrival of Union forces in 1861, and the church never regained its stature. Some stories relate that Union soldiers used it for services during the war, as well as Northerners who came to the area after the war to educate the local population. The door of the vault was ruined by the soldiers, and at some point it was decided to break up the entrance. According to the story, the workmen did a very good job of sealing the vault, only to return the following day to find bricks removed and neatly stacked beside the mausoleum. This occurred many times. Convinced that the supernatural was at work, the job remained unfinished. Local authorities had assured that nobody had been in the area the previous night long enough to complete such a task. So today, the vault remains empty. The door is half sealed by bricks. One might find the experience of looking into the vacant vault more than a bit unsettling, if not downright eerie. Oh right, here's the part you've been waiting oh so patiently for. People have witnessed a great number of ghostly occurrences on the grounds. Some folks have reported strange sensations when walking through the church's graveyard, which, no kidding. Visitors have seen apparitions of people dressed in 18th century clothing. Others have seen the ghost of a lady in white that carries a young human through the graveyard. I love a good lady in white. Many also report hearing whispered prayers or singing coming from the interior of the chapel. And yet others claim to have heard names being shouted in the silent burial ground and in the surrounding woods. With such a mingled heritage and bloodline, coupled with about 5 centuries of history to feed it, it's surprising that the ghosts don't outnumber the living in the thick air of the Sea Islands. Or maybe they do.
In at number 3, we have Most Holy Trinity Church. The Most Holy Trinity Church can be found in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. With the present-day church is the third church built upon the grounds and was established in 1885. The church is known to be built on a site that had been a cemetery prior to being a church. Legend has it not all of the bodies were removed from the cemetery and that the souls of those who remain continue to inhabit the site. Not only that, but a number of people have mysteriously died while praying in the church since its doors first opened in 1885. Thus, those souls are also said to roam throughout the church building. Because of this, the lights in the church have also been known to go on and off without any reasonable explanation. At night, it is said that voices and the sounds of people walking back and forth can be heard in the building. It's been reported that priests who live in the rectory have continued to reserve the space as a guest room ever since the haunting started, as no one has ever been willing to live in it on an ongoing basis. Guests report having heard strange noises and the sound of a person walking back and forth while trying to sleep in the room. Phantom footsteps footsteps have also been heard on the staircases in the buildings, and the dogs who were once kept as pets in the rectory would stare in a trance-like state down the basement stairs, as well as into the dining room when the building got cold. With the number of souls trapped in the building and scary ghost stories throughout the years, it's hard not to believe that this church is cursed by the devil. And finally, in at number 1 we have St. Louis Cathedral. The cathedral located on Jackson Square, St. Louis Cathedral is actually the 4th cathedral built upon its current location. The cathedral is the oldest continually operating cathedral in America. The 2 buildings which used to house the congregation of St. Louis's Cathedral were destroyed by unfortunate events. The first building used as the cathedral was lost to a hurricane in 1722, just 4 years after the city's official founding. The cathedral, which replaced the earliest structure, then burned to the ground in New Orleans' Good Friday fire in 1788. The third itinerary of St. Louis's Cathedral was built in 1794, but by mid-1800s the congregation decided that they wished to enlarge their parish church, thus the 4th version of St. Louis Cathedral went up in the 1850s. Perhaps the most famous ghost associated with the St. Louis Cathedral is that of Père Antoine. Père was a Spanish Capuchin friar at St. Louis Cathedral. He arrived in New Orleans in 1774 and was named pastor. His generosity and kindness to the people of New Orleans made him very popular. He was well liked by all of New Orleans. His death on January 19, 1829 was met with a somber and mourning city. He was laid to rest inside the St. Louis Cathedral 3 days after his death. Since his death in 1829, the ghost of Père Antoine had been seen in St. Louis Cathedral by an untold number of people. His ghost is easily recognized as there is a portrait of him inside of the cathedral. It seems as though the ghost of Père Antoine especially likes to show himself around the holiday seasons. Commonly, the ghost of Père Antoine is seen near the altar and on the balconies. Interestingly, the ghost has been seen in other areas of the city as well, especially in the alley next to the cathedral. In addition to that, the ghost of Pierre, there are other famous ghosts associated with St. Louis Cathedral. Some of the ghosts which are said to haunt St. Louis Cathedral, like that of Père Dagobert, who became pastor of St. Louis Cathedral in 1745. On quiet evenings after worship, people have seen the ghost of Dagobert walking the aisles of the cathedral, his head down to the ground, walking silently in sandals.
Number 5 on this list is the Lady of Guadalupe Church. This church is located in New Orleans and is known to the locals as being one of the most haunted spots in the whole city. This location hasn't always acted as a place of worship, but for a long time was a chapel that you really didn't want to end up at. That's because for the longest time it was actually called the Old Mortuary Church. As I'm sure that you can probably guess, the crowd that entered this place wasn't the liveliest. In fact, using the word live to describe them is just flat out incorrect. New Orleans was hit hard many a time with epidemics, with yellow fever being especially bad. There were times during the city's history where the dead were too many to handle and they had to go somewhere. Enter in the Old Mortuary Church. Thousands upon thousands of bodies have went through these doors over the years. In fact, for the longest time, the only people this place saw were the pastors who were here and the countless dead. Everyday citizens were too scared to come here for fear of catching the disease and wouldn't even risk going to see their departed loved ones. Obviously, all this death has left its ghostly mark. Eventually, it was turned into a full-fledged church that people attend, but not before the spiritual damage had been done. Nowadays, the spirits of some of those who died during this harsh period in New Orleans history still haunt the area. Glowing orbs have been seen by those who frequent the church, floating around at nighttime. Subtle and faint moans can be heard echoing throughout the walls, as if the moans themselves were wind blowing through the church. The ghost of a man has said to approach people from time to time, claiming he needs help and that he was never sick to begin with. This is definitely one of those churches who's seen its fair share of tragedy over the years, and it shows. However, believe it or not, it may not be the most haunted church in New Orleans, but more on that later. Number 4 on this list is St. Helena's Chapel of Ease. This chapel is located in South Carolina and is a ruin of its former self. Number 3 on this list is Nidaros Cathedral. Located in Norway, this is referred to by locals as the most important Norwegian cathedral and also the most haunted. Taking a look at this thing on the outside, it's certainly very beautiful, but also gives me some serious haunted vibes. And those vibes are well founded. The church was finished being built in 1300 and is directly in the center of the city of Trondheim.
It's certainly been around for a large part of Norway's history, however the hauntings at this church have been pretty recent relative to how long it's been around. It all started in 1924 when Bishop Mary Gleditch saw something pretty scary and gruesome. The ghost of a monk who had a massive slash directly across his neck. This monk has been spotted haunting the church ever since, but the weird thing is, nobody knows why. Historians have combed through Norway's history and can't seem to find a time that any order of monks would have stayed at this church. Now at the end of the day, this doesn't mean that having a ghost monk is impossible by any means. It's totally possible that a singular monk just happened to be at this church for some reason and through some tragedy died, or by the nature of that cut was potentially murdered. Whatever his reasoning for being there, he certainly is. Many visitors have spotted him and some have said that they've seen him playing the organ in the church before. I personally can't imagine stumbling upon a monk whose throat is totally cut playing the organ. This is definitely one that deserves a prayer before entry. Number 5 on this list is the Old Post Chapel. This chapel is located in the Arlington, Virginia cemetery and is definitely one of the most haunted churches in the world. The Arlington Public Library writes, the Old Post Chapel was commissioned by Major George Patton Jr. in 1933 when he toured the chapels on the grounds of the Walter Reed Hospital. Patton told Post Commander Colonel Kenyon Joyce that the new chapel should combine the functions of a principal chapel with those of a mortuary chapel in one building. Workers broke ground in February 1934 and the chapel was officially dedicated on April 21, 1935, where it was known for its attractive spire and intricate stained glass windows. The chapel serves as a place of worship for the community, a wedding chapel, and a place of final honors for those laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. Many fallen service members have lain in wait in the Old Post Chapel for their final trip, and it's allowed family members to grieve in private. So it's unsurprising that many active duty service members have reported hearing disembodied voices and footsteps in the chapel when they've been there alone. Locked doors have unlocked themselves and opened on their own. Canine units patrolling with service people will refuse to go into the building and bark at the door, especially at night. And visitors describe a young grief-stricken woman dressed in white who waits for her sweetheart. Rumors are that she threw herself from the bell tower, which remains locked to this day. So what really sticks out to me there, guys, about that excerpt is the canine units. Dogs not wanting to go into this place because they're scared. You ever notice how animals can get skittish when a big storm is coming or something like that? Well, they sense these things and they pick up on stuff that humans just don't. I personally imagine that they probably have a similar ability with spiritual presences or anything of that nature. Also, considering how many people have been laid to rest here, it's no wonder why this place would be as haunted as people are claiming it to be. If you're going, then definitely pray before entering, but don't be scared to just avoid it altogether either. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Paul's Episcopal Church. This church and the grounds that it resides on is haunted by a number of different ghouls. It's located in the Florida Keys and has seen many a tragedy in its days. Whether it be a hurricane, a great fire, or other natural disasters, this church has pretty much been through it all. Ghosts and Gravestones writes, the most well-known haunt of St. Paul's Church Cemetery is that of a man in 19th century attire who appears as a flimsy white vapor. Many believe that it's the spirit of Fleming himself who seems upset. Is it because his gravesite was disturbed so many times throughout the years by all the reconstructions? Nobody knows for sure, but his apparition has startled many. Another spirit that seems to roam the graveyard is a sea captain who appears to take great pleasure in frightening visitors. And beware of the ghost of a man who was legendary for driving the pirates out of Key West. His spirit is angry and ready to taunt, and those who've encountered his apparition say that even on a day when the weather is calm, violent winds come rushing through a tree that sits right next to his grave. John Fleming, the ghost that they talk about there, was the initial owner of this land and died on the property. His wife donated said land to be used for the church, but apparently her husband's spirit never left. The story behind the sea captain is unknown. Why he's come here or what happened to him is all a mystery. One thing is for sure though, he is a very dangerous ghost, and many visitors have reported being assaulted and terrified by him. This is definitely one of those churches that I would again avoid altogether, but if you do go, then make sure you say a prayer before entering. Number 5 on this list is Rosland Chapel. Rosland Chapel is located in Scotland and is arguably the most haunted church in that country. This chapel has a ton of ghostly legends surrounding it that lead to the lore of its hauntings. The Rosland Chapel actually writes themselves. In July 2006, a group of actors were rehearsing in the chapel for a play they were about to do at the Edinburgh Festival. One said that he saw a fairy-like figure in the grounds of the building. Another was locking up the chapel at the end of the rehearsal. As he was doing so, heard the voice of a child in the crypt. Obviously, he didn't want to lock the child in overnight, so he went down to the crypt to get the child, but found that there was no one there. Another tale says that the ghost of a white lady haunts Rosland Chapel. Legend has it that she is a girl from the St. Clair family who was bewitched by an evil spell and sleeps in an enchanted chamber. Here, she is waiting to be rescued by a knight. Once rescued, the spell upon her will be broken and the knight will be granted great treasures. And yet another tale is of a phantom dog which roams the grounds around the chapel, and on stormy nights its ghostly barking can be heard. We got a fairy, we got a child, we got spells, we got a dog. This chapel has everything that a paranormal lover could ever want. They also didn't mention in that article about the ghosts of the monks that supposedly live there. This used to be an area where a bunch of monks would meet while they were alive, and it seems as if their ghosts have never left. And the crazy part about all of this is that nobody knows why this church is as haunted as it is. Most places that are tied to spirits have some sort of horror story to go along with them, but there really isn't anything here at all. I suppose it's possible that this church just happened to be built on an area where tons of spiritual energy has gathered. Hit me in the comments down below what you guys think happened to this place to get it like this, cause I'm honestly stumped. Number 4 on this list is the Ness Church. This church is located in Norway and is no longer functioning. It's actually a collection of ruins now and a very popular spot for ghost hunters. The ghosts here are very interesting and unique. It seems as if they have a strong connection to electronic devices, because whenever anyone brings an electronic device to this place, it will immediately stop working and start flashing uncontrollably. If one wants to have an electronic device here, then it needs to be specifically made to withstand strong spiritual energy. The most popular myth surrounding the ghostly presence that resides here is of a priest named Jacob Christian Finnegan. This was a priest who presided over this church from 1800 to 1837. Apparently he suffered a very grim fate here along with his children. People believe that at some point a gang of thieves came to this place and murdered him. Along with his death, they took his children and bricked them up in the church, leaving them there before ransacking the place and taking any valuables. An even darker version of the legend says that the priest did this to his children himself and then promptly hung himself in the church for the locals to later find. I'm not too sure which legend is the true one, but either one would have left their dark mark behind. The screams of these children are frequently accompanied by the sighting of this priest. It's said that he'll stalk those who come here and follow them around, giving them a horribly uneasy feeling. At this point, the church is nothing but a ruin of its former self, and considering the ghostly presence that's waiting for you, I just avoid going altogether. Number 3 on this list is the Church of Agia Theodora of Vasta. This church is located in Greece and is one of the most unique churches you will ever see. Sticking out of this tiny Byzantine church's roof is 17 holly and maple trees. These are sizable trees as well and grow over 30 meters tall. There are 2 versions of how this church got its ghostly presence, and they're described well by Greeker than the Greeks. They write, coming from a family of only girls, Theodora, to save her father from having to join the army, disguised herself as a boy and joined up. Not long after joining the army, a local girl, believing Theodora to be a boy, and when Theodora, for obvious reasons, rejected her, the girl, out of revenge, claimed she was pregnant by Theodora and demanded they be married. For reasons known only to Theodora, she did not reveal her secret, which could have saved her, and refused to marry and was consequently put to death. Version 2 is more or less the same, only this time, Theodora, again disguised as a boy, joined a monastery as a monk. Why she didn't save herself trouble and join a nun's monastery is not known, but anyway, a nun from a nearby monastery fell in love with the monk Theodora, the ending then being the same. Before her execution, Theodora prayed, "Let my body become a church, my blood a river, and my hair the trees." On the very spot where Theodora was executed, a spring gushed forth and grew to become a river which still exists today, as the river which flows beneath the tiny church. So guys, if that legend holds true, then not only only is this church haunted by a ghost, but the actual church itself is a ghost. This whole thing was made up by the spirit of Theodora and therefore is basically a living church. Locals have said that because of this reason, the water that flows through this river has some exceptional healing properties and can cure many ailments. Considering this church may actually be the spirit of a person who has passed, I highly recommend saying a prayer before you enter. Number 2 on this list is the Templo Mayor Ruins. So a church is typically defined as a place for Christian worship, but if we loosen up the definition a little bit and just make it a building or landmark where people would have worshipped higher beings, then the Templo Mayor Ruins can certainly qualify. This temple is one of the most haunted places in Mexico, and for good reason. Gaurav Gupta writes, "This archaeological site in Mexico has a blood-soaked past. It is a haunted Aztec civilization site that has made its presence felt through the time. Around 4,000 people were brutally killed to please Aztec gods. The priests would cut out the beating hearts from the victim's chest and then throw their lifeless bodies on the stairs of the Aztec temple. Aztec's last emperor made his last stand against invading Spanish armies before he was tortured and killed. This Aztec is now a museum, and tourists report strange, sensational feelings and sightings of shadow figures." 4,000 people were likely sacrificed here. That is just an insane number of people to have died over the years. Not to mention the fact that a battle took place here, and that would have caused more loss of life in great numbers. Needless to say, the spirits of those that passed have never really left. Glowing orbs are always spotted at this place, especially in the evening. Some people have also felt contacted by the dead before. Like they go into a deep trance and get a vision of something to come or something happening in a totally other life. From my research, they've had a hard time explaining it, but they know that something paranormal has touched them. Some locals have even noted a bright light flashing up into the sky at this place before. It happens very infrequently and doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it, but every now and again you can spot a beam of light blast into the sky. I don't think it's unbelievable to think that this place is deeply haunted with all of the death that's happened here. From my reading, it seems to be decently safe to visit if you go during the daytime, but I'd still say a prayer to those that were lost here. And finally, number 1 is the Chapel of the Dead. This one is really interesting because it's actually a crypt underneath a big church. The Chapel of the Dead, or the Capuchin Crypt, is located in Italy, and it's underneath the Santa Maria della Concenzo dei Cappuccini Church. This church is located in Rome and was built in the 1600s. The church itself wouldn't be haunted if it wasn't for the 3,700 skeletal remains that are found underneath it. Yeah, that's right folks, this Chapel of the Dead has a bunch of dead in it. The remains of these dead are everywhere along the walls and represent different rooms of this underground chapel. There are 6 different rooms that comprise this chapel, and they are as follows: Crypt of the Resurrection, the Mass Chapel, Crypt of the Skulls, Crypt of the Pelvises, Crypt of the Leg Bones and Thigh Bones, and Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. Crypt of the Pelvises, guys, that's an actual thing. I feel like I don't need to go into detail about what sort of remains hang along the walls in that room, but yeah, that's an actual thing. And listen to what Wikipedia writes about the last room, the Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. The center skeleton is enclosed in an oval, the symbol of life coming to birth. In its right hand it holds a scythe, symbol of death, which cuts down everyone like grass in a field, while its left hand holds the scales, symbolizing the good and evil deeds weighed by God when he judges the human soul. A placard in 5 languages declares. Obviously, with all this being said, this place is deeply haunted. It sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, and from what locals have said, it definitely could be. Severe bad luck can befall those that enter into this chapel, and it seems to be totally random. I could enter it and be like 100% fine, but you could enter it and just have horrible things happen to you for years. It's a really interesting place to read about, but definitely not the sort of place I'd recommend visiting. Number 5 on this list is the Bor Bodur Temple. Bor Bodur Temple is located in Indonesia and is frankly extremely beautiful. It's located on the island of Java and is one of the biggest Buddhist temples in the entire world. It truly looks like something from a legend or from something directly out of an Indiana Jones movie. Now, it was built many hundreds of years ago, between 780 AD and 840 AD during the Calandria dynasty. There's a lot of lore that surrounds this temple and a ton of mystery. Located in a very remote location, it kind of got forgotten about for several hundred years. Then in 1970, it was almost rediscovered by UNESCO, and it was decided that they would try and rejuvenate it to its former glory. Now, during the process of rediscovering this beauty, they also rediscovered the darker side of this place, which has people believing at least at one point the devil may have been hiding here. Gruesome visuals etched into the interior of this temple depicting some just horrible things. Torture, beheadings, displays of sheer violence that I can't get into detail on YouTube about. Some awful drawings showing what would have gone down here at one point in history. Also, along with these acts of violence, some drawings that seem to point to the presence of the devil. Drawings looking at potential rituals that would have been performed in honor of this devil. People worshipping the devil and praising him, all of that. Nowadays, it's pretty understood that this place no longer hides the devil. But for several hundred years, it's very possible this could have been a bit of a stronghold for either the devil or another evil spirit. Number 3 on this list is Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard. This church is located in Edinburgh in Scotland. History Hit says, with the Kirk tracing its origin to 1598 and the graveyard dating back even further to the 1560s, Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard in Edinburgh is said to be one of the most haunted religious sites in the world. Known for body snatching and violent ghosts, the famously fearsome site has even been referred to by Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson. The site's most famous ghost is Mackenzie poltergeist George Mackenzie, who is known during his lifetime as a ruthless persecutor of Scottish Covenanters, a Presbyterian movement in the 17th century. His spirit was reportedly released in 1999 when a homeless man looking for somewhere to sleep broke into his final resting place, the Black Mausoleum. Next to this mausoleum is the former Covenanters prison, which housed some 1,200 members of a failed anti-government revolution in 1679. Only 257 prisoners came out alive, with the remaining dead sent to haunt the churchyard. This church is haunted by so much negative energy that people around the area believe it's actually attracted the devil. Basically, all of this evil has gotten the devil's attention, and it's possible that one of those evil spirits that's hiding out is the devil in disguise. It's also believed that the devil may have released all of these demonic spirits to keep people away from this place, as he's doing something sinister. We may never know for sure though. And finally, number 1 on this list is Egg Hill Church. Egg Hill Church is one of the creepiest and scariest churches on this list, and it's for good reason. The church is located in Pennsylvania and has seen a horrifying atrocity committed there in the past. Before I even get into the tragedy that went down here, let's just take a look at this place and how creepy it is. It's this small barn-looking structure that doesn't look to be in good repair at all. It's got a few gravestones sitting out front of it, and it's relatively in the middle of nowhere. It looks like the sort of place where a serial killer would be lurking, or in this case, maybe even the devil. In the early 1900s, this place hosted a horrifying mass murder. The pastor of this church held a congregation, gathering everyone in the surrounding areas to this church. When they were all inside, he chained the door shut and murdered everyone. He wasn't just interested in his visitors though, because right after he was done with that, he took his own life as well. This was obviously a major shock to the community when it happened, but even to this day, it's left people baffled. The pastor apparently never showed this sick and sadistic nature in his character before, and this act of terror came out of thin air. That's why people have speculated before that he may not have been acting by himself. It's very possible that it was him in the flesh, but not in the mind. That his body was simply acting as a vessel for the devil or another spirit as they did this. To this day, locals avoid this place and claim that there is a dark force that haunts it. Maybe it's the devil just sitting, waiting in this church for his next helpless victim to wander inside.
Coming in at number 5, we have Ory Church in France. Located in central France, a few miles from Limoges lies a now abandoned town called Ory-sur-Glane. began. The town is now filled with empty houses, train lines that are out of order and a sign of tragedy. With roadside walls pocked with bullet holes, fire marks, scorching stone houses, the church roof has gone through some massive explosion. This tragedy happened on June 10, 1944, when Adolf Dieckmann received information from members of the Vichy regime that SS officers had been captured and were being held by members of the French resistance at Oradour-sur-Vaires. Dieckmann led his team to Oradour-sur-Glane intent on revenge. Whether he went to Oradour-sur-Glane instead of Oradour-sur-Vaires on purpose or whether he mixed up the two towns because of the similarity in their names is something we will never know. The men of the village were quickly rounded up, then herded into a variety of surrounding barns and garages as the women and children were confined to the local church. Then a gas explosion was placed in the church and lit aflame. There was only a handful to survive the tragic accident that happened at the church of this town. With all the lives lost in the church and surrounding town of that night, it is said to be haunted by many spirits. As some witnesses report, as they stand at the church's windows at night, they see the dark spirits of the people who lost their lives walking through the ruined village's deserted streets. Others state they often smell the aroma of burning wood and flesh as it lingers over this abandoned village. Until recently, the new residents would leave gifts along the border of the village of the martyred as a peace offering for the spirits that still haunt the church. In the end, we will never actually know the reason behind the attack upon the Ory Church on June 10, 1944, though some think there was an evil entity or spirit upon the church that coerced the attack to happen. And finally, in at number 1 we have St. Columcille, Ontario. Dating back to 1855, St. Columcille Church was founded and located in the hamlet of Uptergrove. The original frame church was torn down and the present brick edifice was constructed in 1905. This structure sits on a hill far back from the road and can easily be viewed when driving on Highway 12 east from Aurelia. The ghost stories have been spreading since over 100 years ago, classifying the church was haunted, and these tales have been circulated ever since. Today the church is deemed haunted by some local residents and visitors. There have been many reports of ghost sightings, shadowy figures that will suddenly appear, creaking doors and eerie music that will play randomly from the organ. There have also been numerous reports of shadowy sightings of a figure wearing a black hat that floats through the quia area, creating chills for those who had observed it. Mysterious candlelight has been seen flickering from the windows on stormy nights. Many believe the spirit responsible is that of a former priest who, according to legend, pledged to complete a specific number of sermons, though he lost his life before he was able to attain that number. Now some churchgoers say he is returning to fulfill that promise. Coming in at 4, St. Andrews on the Red, Selkirk, Canada. Built between 1845 and 1849 to serve the local community of retired Hudson Bay Company personnel, this church is located in a small suburb of Winnipeg, located on a lightly forested hill with an incredibly impressive Gothic design. It is by far the oldest stone church in Western Canada and has definitely had its fair share of paranormal activity. The church became an old campfire story among young teens and rebellious kids who would dare their friends to walk backwards around the church 3 times, with the expectation that you would disappear. Now of course that never actually happened, but it was still a frightening tale to tell children so they didn't wander through the cemetery at night. Now what makes this church truly chilling is that victims of influenza, diphtheria, typhoid and tuberculosis from the early colonial era were interred here, and their restless spirits are said to still wander the grounds of the church. Specifically, some visitors have reported disembodied red eyes floating through the cemetery, organs playing spontaneously, as well as a mysterious woman cloaked in white who is known to rattle the gates of the church. If you dare, you can take a self-guided tour of the church located in Selkirk, Canada. Coming in at 3, St. Michan's Church, Dublin, Ireland. This is an Anglican church built on the site of an early Norse chapel from 1095, with the current structure dating back to 1686, undertaken by William Robinson. As it stands, this church is the only parish church on the north side of the River Liffey, surviving from a Viking foundation. Now the exterior of the church is nothing to write home about, however the interior is what we're going to be discussing, specifically the vaults. The vaults of St. Michan's contain a large amount of mummified remains, with the walls of the vaults containing limestone, thus keeping the air dry and creating ideal conditions for preservation. Among the remains of the 400-year-old body of a nun, a 6.5-foot man believed to have been a crusader, a boy with a severed right hand and feet, and Henry and John Shears, who took part in the 1798 rebellion. Unfortunately, a number of the crypts in the church's vaults were damaged by vandals in 1996 and once again in 2019. After the most recent event, the church has stated that several mummified remains were desecrated by vandals, including the remains of the nun and the crusader. Tours used to be open, however, after the recent incident they have been temporarily shut down. Not only will you be dealing with the enraged spirits of the dead when visiting this church, but also the despicable living. Coming in at 2, Cathedral of the Assumption of Our Lady, Guadalajara, Mexico. Also known as the Guadalajara Cathedral, this is a Roman Catholic cathedral of the Archdiocese of Guadalajara and was built in 1541 in the Spanish Renaissance style with neo-Gothic spires. However, though the building is beautiful, it has been plagued by hauntings and tragic events. On May 30th, 1574, during Mass, neighbours fired shots into the air. Some of the bullets fell onto the cathedral and started a fire, ultimately damaging the building. A second tragic event struck in 1818 when an earthquake shook the city, causing the towers and dome to collapse. The cathedral was of course repaired, however it continues to be in danger. It was damaged by earthquakes in 1932, 1957, 1985, 1995 and 2003. However, outside of natural disasters, the cathedral also has a ghostly side to it. One of the most popular attractions is of course the Crypt of Archbishops, which is truly chilling. However, more chilling still are the mummified bodies on display there, with one dating back to the 1700s, which belongs to a child that was killed for converting to Catholicism. Some visitors to the cathedral have claimed that they have seen her eyes blink and have witnessed her hair move. Very spooky indeed. And finally, coming in at number 1, St. Thomas Anglican Parish of Mulgoa, New South Wales, Australia. Designed by Reverend Thomas Mackison and built from 1836 to 1838, this church is incredibly striking with a Gothic revival design and is said to be one of the most haunted churches in not just Australia, but in the world. Though the church is youthful in appearance and located in a semi-rural area, it is hiding an incredibly dark and tragic history. Legend has it that 2 young boys died in a fire in the bell tower of the church after a prank went horribly wrong. Since that fateful day, any kind of light, even candles, anger the spirits of the boys' restless spirits. According to a Facebook group, Haunted Places of Sydney, they say, I quote, "There's an urban legend that claims that if you drive laps around the church at night, the headlights of your car will switch off, and if you continue, the car will stall." However, it isn't just the church's legend that is creepy. The surrounding cemetery is also filled with monuments that date back almost 200 years ago. With monuments that date back almost 200 years, adding to the creepy factor. As of right now, the church is owned by Anglican Church Property Trust and was added to the New South Wales State Heritage Register on April 2nd, 1999.